Emily stood in the dim glow of their apartment, twisting her fingers as if the words might dissolve if she didn't say them fast enough. I want to open our relationship, and I've been seeing someone else. The sentence dropped like a stone between them. She braced herself for shouting, for heartbreak, for anything that resembled the explosion she expected. But Daniel only nodded slowly, his expression unreadable, almost calm in a way that scared her more than anger ever could. "Okay," he said quietly. That single word hollowed out her chest. She didn't understand why he wasn't fighting, why he wasn't questioning, why he wasn't trying to keep her. And the next morning, with the sun barely rising, Emily watched Daniel pack a small suitcase and walk out the door without a single complaint. It was only then she realized she had started something she couldn't control. Emily paced around the living room, trying to justify herself even when Daniel hadn't asked a single question. She started explaining polyamory as if she were giving a lecture, her voice trembling but determined. She talked about freedom, about honesty, about exploring connections without restrictions. Daniel listened in silence, hands in his pockets, eyes steady on her without judgment. That silence made her more nervous, so she kept talking. She listed rules she thought would make everything feel controlled. Weekly check-ins, full transparency, emotional boundaries, no overnight stays unless agreed upon. She said it all like she had rehearsed it 100 times. Then came the confession she had been circling since the night before. "There's someone else," she blurted. "His name is Marcus." She expected Daniel's expression to crack, even just a flicker of hurt, anger, disbelief. Instead, he only exhaled softly and nodded once, as if acknowledging a piece of information that didn't concern him personally. His calmness felt surreal, almost unnatural. Emily felt a flash of irritation beneath her guilt. Why wasn't he reacting? Why wasn't he devastated the way she imagined he would be? It wasn't the reaction she'd prepared for. It wasn't the drama she secretly feared, yet subconsciously expected. She realized she didn't understand Daniel at all in that moment. The man she'd lived with for years seemed like a stranger. When she finished talking, Daniel quietly said he understood. He thanked her for being honest. Then he excused himself and went to the bedroom. Emily thought he needed time. She didn't follow. She didn't want to push him into a reaction. But an hour later, she heard drawers opening and closing, suitcases unzipping, hangers clicking. She stood frozen in the hallway as he carried out a duffel bag and a suitcase. "Where are you going?" she finally asked. His answer was simple. "I think it's best if I give you space to explore what you want." He said it calmly, without resentment, without bitterness. It was the gentleness that broke her composure, not the words. Emily tried to respond, but no words came out. Daniel stepped past her, paused for a moment at the door, and gave her a small, tired smile. "Take care, Emily." Then he walked out. No dramatic exit. No slammed doors. No last-minute pleas for reconciliation. Just quiet acceptance that felt heavier than any argument. Emily stood alone in the empty apartment, overwhelmed by the sudden vacuum of his absence. She hadn't imagined he would actually leave. She thought he would protest, negotiate, or at least try to stay in some capacity. Instead, his lack of resistance felt like a silent judgment on everything she'd just confessed. That night, lying alone in their bed, she realized something unsettling. She had asked for freedom, but she hadn't been prepared for the cost of getting it. Daniel spent the next few days settling into his new apartment, a modest one-bedroom that smelled faintly of new paint and unfamiliar air. He tried to distract himself with work, errands, and silence, but the sudden emptiness in his routine felt heavier than he expected. One afternoon, his company sent him to assist at a charity art gala downtown, and he welcomed the chance to be anywhere that wasn't his apartment. The venue buzzed with music, conversation, and glittering lights bouncing off paintings and champagne glasses. Daniel moved through the crowd, organizing equipment and coordinating volunteers until a familiar voice caught his attention. "Daniel, is that really you?" He turned and saw Laura, Emily's stepmother, dressed elegantly yet radiating a warmth that immediately eased the tension in his shoulders. He hadn't seen her in months, not since a family dinner where she'd been the only one to ask about his work with genuine interest. Seeing her now felt strangely grounding. She smiled wide, surprised but clearly happy to see him. "I didn't know you worked these events," she said. He chuckled and shrugged. "Just helping out tonight." They fell naturally into conversation, the kind that didn't feel forced or polite, just easy. Laura asked about his move, and Daniel carefully avoided the details about Emily. Still, Laura could sense something had shifted. She didn't pry. Instead, she cracked a joke about the terrible lighting in the venue and made him laugh harder than he had in days. Later, Daniel found himself walking with her through the gallery section, listening as she pointed out artists she admired and quirky stories about pieces she'd seen over the years. Her humor was sharp but gentle, her presence comforting without trying to be. At some point, Daniel realized he hadn't thought of Emily for nearly an hour, and the realization startled him. When the event wrapped up, Laura approached him near the exit, holding her purse and a half-finished cup of sparkling water. "If you're not too busy," she said with a playful tone, "I know a little diner around the corner that serves the best late-night pancakes." Daniel hesitated out of instinct, knowing how complicated this could become. But something in Laura's expression, sincere, calm, unintrusive, made the hesitation fade. "Sure," he said. They walked together through the cool night air, the city lights reflecting in the puddles along the street. At the diner, the conversation flowed with surprising ease. They talked about travel, childhood embarrassments, favorite movies, and the quietly ridiculous parts of adulthood no one warns you about. Laura listened with real interest, not the performative curiosity Daniel had grown used to. When she laughed, it was genuine. When she asked questions, they carried no agenda. Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, seen, understood, and oddly safe. When they parted ways outside the diner, Laura touched his arm gently. "Let's do this again sometime," she said softly. Daniel nodded before he could second-guess himself. And as he walked home under the city lights, he realized this night had shifted something inside him in a way he couldn't yet explain. Daniel and Laura began spending more time together, their meetings gradually becoming private and intentional rather than coincidental. They started with casual dinners at quiet bistros, where the conversation flowed effortlessly, punctuated by laughter and shared observations about life. One evening, Laura suggested they attend a stand-up comedy show at a local club. Daniel agreed without hesitation, eager for the distraction and the easy comfort of her company. The night was filled with laughter, and he found himself noticing little things about her. The way she leaned forward when she found something funny, the subtle sparkle in her eyes when she was amused. After the show, they wandered through the nearby streets, still talking and joking, the energy between them quiet but unmistakable. On another night, Laura invited Daniel to a small wine-tasting event she regularly attended, explaining that she loved discovering new flavors and pairing them with good conversation. He agreed again, intrigued by the opportunity to see her in a different light and curious about the world she moved through with such ease. The evening passed with shared glasses and whispered comments about the notes of each wine, their hands brushing occasionally, sending small sparks neither could ignore. They began to text daily, sharing thoughts about books, articles, and music, each message building a private rhythm that grew increasingly intimate. One late afternoon, as they sat together in a quiet corner of a cafe, Laura leaned across the table, her voice low and earnest. "I enjoy this more than I expected," she admitted, her eyes locking with his. Daniel smiled, feeling the same truth, though he hadn't found the courage to voice it yet. Days later, during a casual walk through a city park, Laura reached for his hand first. The gesture felt natural, right, and it created a new tension neither wanted to ignore. They talked openly about their feelings, both acknowledging the connection had grown into something more serious than friendship. Daniel was hesitant to rush, mindful of the complexities of their shared history with Emily, but Laura's patience and honesty reassured him. One evening, after a quiet dinner at her apartment, Laura kissed him gently, a soft, deliberate motion that confirmed the feelings they had both been sensing. The kiss was a turning point, a silent agreement that their bond was no longer casual. They spent the following weeks exploring the relationship, balancing careful openness with the excitement of something new and genuine. Daniel felt alive in a way he hadn't in months, inspired by her laughter, insight, and unwavering kindness. They shared meals, movies, walks, and conversations that lasted long into the night, each moment deepening their understanding of one another. Laura's warmth and Daniel's attentiveness created a mutual trust that felt rare and precious. As the days passed, they began discussing the future, tentative plans to navigate their lives together while being mindful of past complications. By the time they sat side by side on a quiet bench overlooking the city skyline, it was clear that they were committed to something real. Neither could deny the strength of their bond, nor the sense of possibility that came with it. The relationship between Daniel and Laura had blossomed quietly, but undeniably, setting the stage for a new chapter neither had anticipated, but both were eager to explore. Emily had been scrolling through her phone when she spotted a familiar photo pop up on a social media story. Her heart stopped for a moment before she realized it was Daniel, sitting across from Laura at a cozy, dimly lit restaurant. Her fingers trembled as she read the caption, innocuous to anyone else but devastating to her. Late dinner with a great friend. Emily's mind raced, trying to process what she was seeing. She couldn't believe Daniel had moved on so quickly, and the fact that it was with Laura, her stepmother, made the shock worse. Before she could stop herself, she grabbed her coat and stormed out, needing to confront them in person. She arrived at the restaurant, heart pounding, and immediately spotted them through the window, laughing together over shared plates. Her blood boiled, a mix of anger and disbelief coursing through her veins. She pushed open the door, letting it slam loudly, drawing a few curious glances from nearby diners. Daniel looked up, surprised, and Laura's smile faltered as she noticed Emily's furious expression. Emily marched over, voice shaking but loud enough to carry across the room. "What is this? How could you do this?" she demanded. "Emily, wait," Daniel started, but she cut him off. "Are you seriously sitting here with my stepmother after everything?" Laura stood calmly, her voice firm but steady. "Emily, calm down. You're making this into something it is. I didn't do anything wrong. Daniel and I are just having dinner." Emily's face contorted in disbelief. "This is disgusting. This is just sick." Laura shook her head, meeting Emily's gaze without fear. "You need to look at yourself, Emily. You wanted freedom, you wanted honesty, but when someone else exercises it, you can't handle it. This isn't about me or Daniel being wrong. This is about you refusing to accept the choices you made." Emily stumbled back slightly, words failing her for a moment. She tried to argue, to twist the situation to make herself the victim, but Laura's calm, unwavering stance left her without a response. Daniel stood quietly beside Laura, his expression neutral but protective, giving no room for Emily to escalate further. Her face flushed, her emotions a turbulent storm of anger, hurt, and humiliation. Unable to continue, she turned abruptly, storming toward the exit. As she left, she muttered something under her breath, a mix of rage and disbelief, but it was lost in the ambient noise of the restaurant. Daniel exhaled slowly, watching Emily disappear into the night. Laura reached out, lightly touching his arm. "Are you okay?" she asked. Daniel nodded, still processing the intensity of the confrontation. "Yes, it's fine. I think she just needed to see it to understand." Laura gave a small, reassuring smile. Then we let her learn that on her own. There's nothing more we can do right now. They sat back down, returning to their meal, a quiet determination settling between them. Outside, Emily's footsteps echoed on the pavement, each one carrying the weight of her frustration and the realization that control had slipped from her grasp entirely. The confrontation had erupted, but it was clear that the balance of power had shifted in ways she had not anticipated. Emily refused to accept what had happened without a fight. She spent the next days plotting ways to undermine Laura and Daniel, determined to reclaim a sense of control she felt slipping away. Her first step was to contact Laura's family, painting exaggerated stories about her intentions with Daniel, hoping to create suspicion and doubt. She called relatives, using carefully chosen words to make Laura seem manipulative and dishonest, hoping they would confront her or distance themselves. Next, she turned to social media, posting vague, accusatory messages about deceit and betrayal without naming anyone directly, confident that those who knew Laura would connect the dots. Emily even went further, reaching out to some of Laura's professional contacts, insinuating that she had engaged in unethical behavior, aiming to damage her reputation. She felt a thrill each time she imagined Laura receiving the messages, imagining the panic and disruption it would cause. But Laura was prepared. She had anticipated the possibility of retaliation and quietly began documenting every interaction Emily had initiated. Emails, texts, phone calls, and social media posts were meticulously saved, creating a clear record of Emily's attempts to manipulate and slander. Laura did not confront Emily directly. She waited until she had irrefutable evidence. Once everything was compiled, Laura contacted her Uncle Harold, the family's trusted advisor and the one overseeing Emily's inheritance. She presented the full record, showing Emily's deliberate attempts to interfere with her life and career. Harold reviewed the documentation carefully, his expression unreadable, but the conclusion was clear. Emily received a stern warning about her actions and the consequences they could carry, both legally and financially. Her carefully orchestrated plan backfired spectacularly. Instead of weakening Laura, she had given her the proof needed to secure her position and protect herself. Emily felt the sting of failure, the frustration of realizing that her efforts to punish Laura and assert control had only reinforced Laura's stability and reputation. Her anger turned inward as she struggled to understand why nothing she did worked, why her attempts at retaliation were ineffective. Even Marcus, the man she had hoped would support her, began to distance himself, wary of her increasingly erratic and negative energy. Emily felt isolated, her usual strategies of manipulation and control failing completely. She tried to rationalize it, to find a new angle, but every path seemed blocked. The weight of her actions began to settle heavily on her shoulders, forcing her to confront the reality of her choices. Her attempts at vengeance had not only failed, but had exposed her behavior to those who had previously supported or tolerated her. Emily realized that if she wanted to maintain any semblance of stability or her inheritance, she would have to change her approach entirely. The experience was a harsh lesson in accountability and the consequences of letting anger and jealousy drive decisions. Laura and Daniel, meanwhile, continued their lives largely untouched by Emily's attacks, their bond strengthened rather than weakened by the confrontation. Emily, left to face the fallout, understood that retaliation without strategy or moral grounding only served to isolate her further. The situation had escalated beyond her control, and the consequences were now unavoidable. Her focus shifted reluctantly from trying to hurt Laura to figuring out how to repair the damage she had done to herself. Emily's frustration and desperation continued to grow as she realized the extent of the consequences she was facing. She tried one last extreme measure, creating a website dedicated to discrediting Laura, filled with half-truths and exaggerated claims. Her plan was meticulous, aiming to sway public opinion and damage Laura's professional reputation. However, she underestimated the legal precautions Laura had already taken. Within 48 hours, lawyers contacted Emily, issuing a formal cease and desist notice and threatening legal action if the site remained active. The reality hit her hard. Her actions were not only failing, but also putting her in real jeopardy. At the same time, Marcus, who had tolerated some of her negativity in the past, confronted her. He explained that her constant anger and manipulations were exhausting and toxic, and he could no longer be involved in her life. Emily felt a pang of loss and shock, realizing she had driven away one of the few supportive people in her life. For the first time, she faced the need to take responsibility for her own behavior. Her family insisted she begin therapy regularly, both to address the mental strain her actions had caused and to ensure she remained capable of managing her inheritance responsibly. Therapy sessions became a new routine, offering a structured space for reflection and self-awareness that she had long avoided. Meanwhile, Daniel and Laura's life moved in the opposite direction. They continued to grow closer, their relationship deepening through mutual support, understanding, and shared experiences. They spent weekends exploring the city, cooking meals together, and planning future adventures, each day reinforcing the bond they had begun months earlier. The contrast between Emily's chaotic struggle and Daniel and Laura's stability became increasingly evident to everyone around them. Daniel and Laura even began discussing plans to move in together, considering how best to merge their lives while respecting the past, but focusing on the future. Emily, observing from a distance, had no choice but to acknowledge the success and happiness of the two people she had tried to undermine. Slowly, she began to internalize the lessons she had resisted. Honesty matters more than control, and manipulation only leads to isolation. Therapy helped her confront the patterns in her behavior, and she started to recognize the importance of accountability and empathy. While it was a slow and sometimes painful process, she began making small but meaningful changes in her interactions and perspective. Daniel and Laura's continued happiness served as a silent example, showing her that relationships could thrive through trust and respect rather than domination and jealousy. Months passed, and Emily gradually found a sense of equilibrium, learning to manage her emotions and expectations more healthily. She began taking steps to repair some relationships she had damaged, understanding that restitution was a process requiring patience and sincerity. Through this period, Daniel and Laura remained a steady presence in each other's lives, their love and partnership solidifying into a stable, joyful routine. Emily's journey of self-discovery and recovery became intertwined with the lessons of letting go and observing others, happiness without envy. By the end of this chapter, she was slowly finding a way to coexist with the reality of her choices, while Daniel and Laura looked forward to building a shared, fulfilling future together. 6 months had passed since the storm of conflict and confrontation. Daniel and Laura remained deeply connected, their relationship steady and filled with mutual respect and joy. They shared mornings over coffee, evenings exploring new corners of the city, and weekends planning small adventures together. Their bond had grown stronger through patience, honesty, and shared understanding. Emily, meanwhile, had begun to face the consequences of her actions more constructively. Therapy became a cornerstone of her routine, helping her process emotions and recognize the patterns that had led to her destructive behavior. She slowly started rebuilding trust with those she had hurt, acknowledging her mistakes openly and sincerely. Though the process was gradual, she began to find a sense of inner stability and self-awareness that had eluded her for so long. Daniel reflected on everything that had happened and realized that the form of a relationship, whether polyamorous or monogamous, was not what mattered most. What mattered was honesty, integrity, and living true to one's desires without using them to manipulate or control others. In the end, all three had grown in unexpected ways. Daniel and Laura continued their journey together, happy and united. Emily had begun her own path toward healing, finally understanding that personal growth required accountability, patience, and self-reflection.